Product provided by Nintendo. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is finally out, and all three of us are going to give our preliminary thoughts on this game. It's important to note that the game is massive and we have not yet beaten the whole thing. As we continue to play this game, we'll update you on our thoughts and opinions as they evolve.
So if I were going to ask somebody who had played Breath of the Wild before having the chance to buy it myself, whether or not it's worth purchasing, there are 4 things I think that I would want to ask. Number 1, has the storytelling improved, and how does it work with the open world format? Number 2, how has the open world nature of the game's design changed the established formula? 3, has the difficulty increased from previous entries? And 4, what other notable changes have been implemented, and do they feel like improvements? Alright, let's start with number 1, with storytelling. Of course, we have to put a major asterisk next to this because we haven't beaten the game yet. But from what we've seen so far, it's basically the same exact kind of story that we have already seen in previous Zelda games. You have Ganon and this kind of rise of darkness that has sort of encompassed the world, and you have Link as the chosen hero who is meant to save Zelda and banish Ganon. And when we're looking at it from sort of like a wide, simple sort of viewpoint, yeah, it's basically the same thing. Now, whether they have improved on the method of delivery of that story is something that I think is worth talking about, rather than just, flicking this aside and saying, it's just the same thing we've seen already. At the moment, I can't comment in any kind of complete way because we haven't seen that much of the story yet, which is very interesting because we've played well more than 20 hours of the game and we still just haven't seen that much story content yet. That's how huge this game is. But from what we've seen, the construction of certain scenes, the way that the scenes are paced, the way the dialogue is written, the way that they highlight characters with the cinematography, it does feel like a step up from what we've seen before. It feels more cinematic, and it does feel like an overall step forward in that way. But is it quite the step forward that maybe we were looking for? I would have to say that from what I've seen so far, that's not the case. However, it's not bad. It's not bad by any means. It's not detracting from kind of the central experience of the game, which is more about the exploration, the battle mechanics, and the gameplay. I do have to say that the one thing that I will criticize here is the voice acting, and it's not necessarily the quality of the actors. There is one actor in particular that I didn't think was very good. But for the most part, they're fine actors. It's not the acting as much as it is the casting choices. There are certain characters where it's like you hear their voice, and it does not match the age of the character. It does not match the look of the character. I felt like that aspect in terms of presentation and storytelling was probably one that I would call poor. The casting choices did not make sense to me. But luckily, there's not a lot of spoken dialogue in the game. You're still reading text. And so a lot of that problem is alleviated by the fact that you're not hearing voice acting all that often in this game. As for the second question, speaking on how the open world nature of the game has changed the formula from previous entries, it is hard to overstate how different this game is from previous Zelda games, especially the 3D console Zelda games, basically since Ocarina of Time. There is just very little direction that you are given. You are given so much freedom to explore the world and do things in whatever order you see fit. I mean, there are definitely some gameplay design choices they made to discourage you from going one way or whatever. The enemies will be harder there, that kind of thing where it's like, okay, that area right now is not probably where I should be. Maybe I'll go this way. I mean, that kind of thing exists, but you are still totally free to approach the game however you want. And just from watching how I've played it versus watching how Lannon and Kaysen have played it versus, and they'll attest to this too with the way that their wives have played it, it is amazing how many different ways you can approach the same exact challenge. And they all work. Your play style is completely viable, whoever you are, and that's really cool. That means that you can really personalize the experience. But to speak more about how this has changed from the previous games, Without getting into too many details or spoiling any of like the solutions to puzzles or dungeons or anything like that, there are no keys in this game. You go into the dungeon, there are no keys. You don't open a chest, find a key, and open a door, like unlock a door to go to the next area. That's like not existent here. It is just such a breath of fresh air for anyone who had any level of fatigue with some of the elements that were carried over for every Zelda game, how they started to feel the same in a lot of ways, where you have this many dungeons. The dungeons were themed based on like fire, water, whether you're in the desert, they had the themes to these temples. And like that sort of thing isn't really a thing in this game either. I mean, they definitely have those different areas, but like the solutions to problems are not dependent on the item that you find in that dungeon. You know what I mean? Like, there are so many aspects that have just become totally commonplace within Zelda games that they have done away with here completely. I think that it's accurate to say that of any of the previous Zelda games that have come before Breath of the Wild, the one that it feels the most similar to is by far the original Legend of Zelda, 1986 NES. That is the closest game in feeling and in just like the approach to design to Breath of the Wild. And that's going to be very, very exciting for a lot of people who played that back in the day. But if you're a younger generation who didn't have a chance to play that, and you're used to sort of the more modern format for Zelda, this is just absolutely, totally, 100% different than what you would expect from any Zelda game. And I think it's a really good thing. I think it is really refreshing, and it has made the game much more exciting for me personally. One thing I want to touch on, and specifically, is just the tone and atmosphere. It feels so different. We've gotten so used to the music of Zelda kind of being in a similar kind of style to that of Ocarina of Time. There's a lot of songs from Ocarina of Time that have been carried over. The dun 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 dun. There's a lot of music, whether that's like shop music, mini game music. A lot of music has been carried over from Ocarina of Time and has kept sort of that similar look and feel to it. And the music here, while being very minimalist, is also just pretty experimental, I want to call it. And some people are going to love where it's going, and some people are going to think it feels very strange. I personally kind of sit in both areas. There are some parts of the music where it's just like, wow, that's really cool that they have, made this choice. And there's some it's like, I just don't really feel like that fits. But if nothing else, it creates an incredibly unique feeling to this game that I have never had in any Zelda game prior to this. And that just adds to the fact that it feels like a totally new experience. I don't feel like I'm treading any kind of common ground here with any of the previous Zelda games, except for in the basic plot. Other than that, it feels like an entirely new thing, and that is very exciting. Moving on to the third point, has the difficulty increased from previous entries? Oh yeah, it is way harder. This game is way harder than any of the 3D console Zelda games, basically anything since Ocarina of Time. It is so much harder, and that is a really good thing in my opinion. Let's put it this way, it's much more difficult, but it isn't punishing. Basically, when you die, you lose progress, but you don't lose any of your equipment. You kind of go back to a previous autosave. It just loads up an autosave, kind of similar to something like Skyrim. But you don't have to save quite so often as you did in Skyrim. They're very generous with their autosaves. So you'll lose the little bit of progress you made since the last autosave, but you'll still have all your equipment and all that kind of thing. And I feel like that's really cool because it allows people to get used to become accustomed to the level of difficulty here. It's like you'll die a lot, even to common enemies, but you won't lose a whole lot from dying. And it sort of teaches you how to get better at the game. You begin to learn the differences between this and previous Zelda games, and I really like that. I think the controls are something worth talking about here because it's hard to get used to them. And that leads a little bit into some of the difficulty I've experienced. There's a jump button now, a dedicated jump button, and it's so hard for me to get out of like almost the muscle memory association that I have with 3D Zelda games where the action button, the A button, which is, you go read signs, you go talk to people, it's all kind of contextualized to that A button. I'm so used to that being the way you backflip and side jump in combat that I'm trying to do that even still after this many hours, but getting used to the fact that there's a dedicated jump button for that was a little bit tough for me at first. But it does make the combat and the exploration a lot more diverse, having a dedicated jump button. So there's a lot of things like that that are going to kind of culminate into this game feeling a lot more difficult than previous Zelda entries, and it's going to lead to a lot of deaths for players on a first playthrough. However, it is also just, again, leading into this feeling for me of how different this feels from previous Zelda games. And to answer the last question, what other notable changes have been implemented and do they feel like improvements? There's so many that I wouldn't even be able to list it in kind of this short format. But let's talk about just a few. First of all, world design. The world is absolutely massive. It is huge. And the fact that they give you so little direction, there is almost no hand-holding here. You're free to just do it however you want. It makes it so that, you have an idea of what you want to do, and you start heading in that direction to go do that thing. But you'll come across 5 or 6 other interesting things to do, and you can get lost just in all of this cool stuff so easily that you end up playing for 2 hours, and you're like, holy crap, I never even got to the place to accomplish the thing that I set out to do in the first place. I did all this other stuff, discovered all these other places, all this other cool stuff, and that is one major difference here, is exploration is way, way deeper. There's way more to the world here, and it's a much larger part of the experience than just getting from point A to point B to keep the story going. In that vein, it feels a little bit like Skyrim to me, where I'd play the game with an idea of what I wanted to do, and then by the time I'm done playing, I've accomplished a ton of stuff, but didn't actually get done what I set out to do when I sat down to play the game. Horse mechanics are very different here. It actually feels a lot like Shadow of the Colossus. And before people jump on and be like, oh, I hated Shadow of the Colossus' controls, it's better than that. It's not quite as wonky as that is, but the idea behind it is that you are not controlling the horse, you're controlling Link, who's on the horse, pulling the reins from side to side, and the horse has a mind of its own, which I think is really cool. You have to kind of build a bond with the horse before it will obey your commands consistently. And basically, you don't hold forward when you run. You just press the A button to spur the horse, and it runs forward, and then you use the control stick to sort of, rein it from side to side. It feels very consistent with sort of the whole feeling of being in the wild goes with this game. And there are many elements of this game that, might have been mechanics that were carried over from previous games, but have been altered in such a way to where they give you that really, really unique feeling of being out surviving in the wilderness. I will say the one major criticism I have of the game so far, and it's not a criticism of the idea so much as the implementation. I love the fact that weapons degrade and break. And I love the fact that you have to carry sort of a diverse set of weapons and shields and things of that nature. However, they break so quickly, and I don't like that. I wish they lasted a little bit longer. It's like you get a new bow, and you shoot 10, 15, 20 arrows, and the bow breaks. What kind of bow is that? What kind of build quality is that? That's crazy. That you get a new weapon, and you hit an enemy with it 10, 15 times, and it breaks. I wish that they didn't degrade so quickly. I find that a little bit annoying and in some ways kind of unrealistic. However, it is not something that is so annoying that it severely detriments the experience. I still really love this game, and I still love that the idea is there. I would rather have this in the game in its current form than have it not in the game at all. Have it be more like the previous Zelda games. I really think it's a great idea. It's a great way of changing up combat. And they have lots of different weapon types, which I think is really, really excellent. It's just something that I found to be a little bit annoying, that's all.
There are so many small flashes of brilliance that combine to make this game an amazing, cohesive experience. One of those things is that you only lose progress when you die. Now, honestly, I would like for the game to be a little more difficult in this regard. I would like to lose something that I would have to regain other than just a little bit of progress. Because of the game's incredible save system, you simply revert back to your previous save, which generally doesn't tend to be that far back in time. Sometimes it's a little bit frustrating, but for the most part, it's not that punishing. What this does in my mind is it encourages experimentation. It encourages risk-taking. It encourages trying different things that you think might not work. You're not going to be punished too terribly, and so offense is a little more encouraged. This game's not quite as defensive as it otherwise possibly could be. Now, that save system is one of my favorite aspects of the game. When I would play Skyrim, I would save incessantly, over and over, even after something only mildly noteworthy happened. It was just a habit because I didn't want to lose my progress. Now, Breath of the Wild does the grunt work for you. They keep a list of saves going back in time, and you can revert back to any one of those saves. I really appreciate this because it allows for a less broken experience, and you can just get lost in the game. The Sheikah Slate itself is one of the smartest things that this game has done. It allows for this genius approach to shrines and dungeons where you're not looking for a specific item in that shrine or dungeon to allow you to solve the puzzle. You have all of the tools necessary at your disposal already, and it's a matter of figuring out what you need to use and where and how. And it's just enough different capabilities to not be overly complicated, but to allow for sufficient challenge. And sometimes you really just have to step back, take a look at things, and think because you know you have the tools necessary to figure out the solution to the problem. This game does include fast travel, which was something that some people were wondering maybe would be a feature that would be included in the future DLC. But no, there's fast travel, and the animation is glorious. I love how, again, opposed to Skyrim, there aren't really that many waypoints that you can actually fast travel to. Now, in Skyrim, you can essentially fast travel to any icon that you had visited previously. And towards the end of the game, for those of you who played it, your map just got littered with symbols all over the place, and it in some ways kind of started to lose meaning. Breath of the Wild doesn't do this. Each region only has a couple of places that you can transport yourself to, meaning that horses are still important. You're not just going to teleport right to the front gates of a location. You're going to transport yourself somewhere where you're going to need to get on your horse or run on foot and have some sort of experience between where you teleported and when you actually got to your destination. Again, speaking of the map, minor locations are even named on this map, which really makes the world feel lived in. All of these places and bridges and rivers and forests, they all have unique names to them that feel meaningful. It feels like people have traveled all throughout this world already, and they've really taken ownership of the land. Not only that, but you run across adventurers while you're traveling who are even selling things. So it's not always necessary to go back to a town to sell something or to buy something you need. Oftentimes, you can run across somebody out in the wild so that you don't have to break up your experience while you're exploring. Now, as far as we can tell, there's essentially unlimited material storage space in this game, and materials being the apples and the mushrooms and the ingredients you would use to make something more complex. What is limited, though, is your weapon storage space, your shield, your bow storage space. Now, what's interesting about that is it forces you to constantly be looking for better gear. Your gear breaks, and it breaks relatively quickly. I found that just when I started to get really attached to a piece of equipment, it would break and I would lose it. And that sense of not wanting to have lost that thing, but having that be beyond my control if I actually wanted to use it, fueled my exploration a little bit more. The exploration in this game is not simply a phase. You don't just go to an area for the first time, figure out where all the important things are, and just spend time in those important areas. You are constantly re-exploring areas that you've been over to acquire weapons you'd obtained there previously, materials that you need to make some sort of elixir to strengthen yourself against a stronger enemy. I think that the game's done an excellent job of creating a good feedback loop of you explored, you obtain weapons, you utilize those weapons and materials to fight higher level bosses and enemies, in which process those things are going to break or you're going to exhaust them and you'll have to feed right back into the exploration. Another way in which I believe this game improves on some smaller things that Skyrim did was making the materials not have intrinsic abilities unless you cook them. So for example, you can't just eat some type of material that would give you some kind of electric resistance and get a little bit of electric resistance. That ability is completely locked behind cooking that item. So in Skyrim, oftentimes you would find enough potions that you really never had to make any of your own, or you could get a little bit of an ability if you ate an ingredient, because that was how you found out what the ingredients were. You ate them and you experienced the effect, and then you tried to combine effects to make more interesting potions. There's a lot of potential there, but Skyrim didn't really explore it. In this game, those items do nothing but heal a minimal number of hearts unless you cook them. And so cooking is actually a really big active part of the game experience. Another thing that I absolutely loved was this game forces you to experience multiple modes of combat. This game has spears, short swords, shields, long swords, bows, boomerangs, clubs, things like that. You cannot just focus on the one that you like, because it will break and you'll need to move on to the next thing that you have that you just so happen to explore for. This means that you can't just create a class that, say, only uses a bow, for example. Like in Skyrim, again, you could just be a thief and just shoot everything with a bow, and that was perfectly fine and an acceptable way to progress through the game. You cannot do that in this game. You're going to need to constantly evolve your strategy to accommodate the different weapons that you happen to have on you. On that same point, the lightning system in the game, which I originally thought was kind of arbitrary, the idea that if you were wearing metal, you had a metal shield, a metal sword, that when a storm came around, there was a chance that you could get struck by lightning, I actually really like it. What it does is it forces you to make sure you're keeping a variety of weapons on you, because the only way to avoid this is to use some kind of wooden shield or wooden club or something like that that would not get struck by lightning, wouldn't attract that electricity. What that does is it prevents people, again, from getting into just one mode, one kind of thing. You don't play a class in this game. There's not one thing that you stick to. You need to make sure you have a diversity of equipment, a diversity of strategies that you're utilizing. Otherwise, you're really going to get in trouble. If you only have metal weapons on you and only metal shields and you get in the middle of a storm, you are essentially defenseless and offenseless. There's nothing that you can do until the storm passes, you run out of the area, or you find another weapon that is wooden. I actually think this is a genius way to kind of mix up the gameplay. And on the point of the weapons and which ones I've really, really loved so far, my absolute favorite is the boomerang. It works different from any past Zelda boomerang. You use it essentially as a sword to smack people with your regular sword button, but then if you go to throw it, it'll fly out and it'll come back at you. The catch here is that you have to time your catch, or the boomerang will just land on the ground and go flying past you, sometimes fall into water or somewhere where you can't get it again. So to throw a boomerang, to hit an enemy, have it come back around, and to successfully catch it on cue is extremely satisfying. It's my favorite weapon to use in the game so far. The art direction in this game is incredible. It captures that Ghibli sense of melancholy, a beautiful world where imperfect people have made some bad things happen. I really enjoy the way that characters' faces are animated, the different ways that they've styled characters' hair, costume design. I think this game has followed excellent character design principles. There are characters and buildings that you immediately recognize from a ways off. You know what it is right away, you know who they are, you don't need to go up and talk to them to find out. Many of the characters are walking around with a little bit of a speech bubble popping out, giving you a hint of what they have to say. If it's not something you're interested in, you don't need to talk to them to find out that it wasn't something you're interested in. You just keep moving, you keep playing the game, you keep going. So many small adjustments like that combine to make an amazingly cohesive and consistent experience.
The game is incredible. It's huge. It is so big, and there is so much to do. I was a little concerned at first that maybe there wouldn't be enough in the world. The world's too sparse, it's too empty, or maybe there's too much in the world. There's just things everywhere, or there's constantly enemies. You're constantly running in and having to fight moblins or other creatures. That's not the case. They struck a perfect balance here. Different things reside in different areas, and everything is perfectly spaced out. You can avoid fighting enemies if you want by using the climbing mechanics or by riding your horse. There are ways to avoid things, but those same ways are also creative ways to engage in those same types of things. If you want to go to a shrine, if you see an enemy camp, you can climb up and do a sneak attack from the air, or you can ride your horse straight through the camp and start slashing them as you go. The options are endless with this game. You can do anything. At first, it was a bit overwhelming. I found myself really having trouble coming to grips with where to go. I mean, they don't start you in a corner of the map. They start you in the very center of the map of this entire world. You are in the middle. You can literally go anywhere from there. This game has so much to offer to so many different types of players. People who want to kind of lay back or play more defensively. People who just want to explore. People who just want to have fun. People who just want to test the physics engine of the game. People who just want to go in and fight and be super offensive about it. People who are into climbing. People who are into, horses and horse riding, or just, going to the villages and just kind of chilling out and just being a part of this world. This has something to offer almost every type of video game player that there is. You can even snowboard down a mountain. I mean, the game is packed. It has so much to offer. The parrying and dodging mechanics are so well implemented. It's not just whether you can parry and you can get a hit off, or whether it happens, naturally within the game. If you can time a parry right with your shield, and if you hit A right before the enemy attacks you, you'll blow their weapon back, and it'll go into this slow motion mode where you can then rush forward and unleash a fury of attacks on your enemy and just completely immobilize them. The timing can be difficult and it varies from enemy to enemy, but once you've got it down, it's a super effective tool and it makes the game so much more fun and engaging to play. After having played this game at E3 and then here with the Nintendo Switch, I have to say I prefer the Wii U gamepad controls to the Nintendo Switch. I like having the sticks, both the sticks being up top. I like the feel of the gamepad. I like my hands are a little bit bigger, and so the Switch, it's just a smaller controller, and it's very sensitive, it's very touchy. And I found myself really kind of wishing that I was able to play this game on the Wii U gamepad. We have the Switch version and a Switch, which is incredible, but luckily the game is available for the Wii U as well. Now, the trade-off is that you cannot play this game on the go the way that you can with the Switch, and that's something I don't really want to give up. But the Wii U gamepad offers you a better control system than the Nintendo Switch does. When it comes to riding horses, it is the most interesting thing in the world. You pick your own horse, okay? You go out into the wild, you pick a horse that you like, and you have to sneak up behind it, or you have to jump onto it from a height, or you have to find some way to get on the horse's back, and you need to tame the horse yourself, and it takes time. But it is so cool and it is so worth it. This isn't a horse that was given to you. This isn't a horse that, it's the best thing that you can get in the game and this is just what you have and you have to deal with it. You get to select your own horse, and if you select a good horse that has really good stamina, it's going to be difficult to tame. These horses have their own minds. They want to do their own things. You literally just jumped onto a horse that was wild in the middle of a field. It's not going to do what you want it to right away. It'll probably buck you off. But as you continue to tame this horse and to get it to do what you want, you can feed it, you can pet it, and just through riding it a lot and often, you can come to be on the same page as the horse, and you need to control it less and less. The horse will kind of start to follow the paths on its own, and the horse will then, you can grow a bond together with the horse, and you can really become attached to an animal of your own choosing in this game. It's incredible. It's one of the best experiences of horse riding and of the whole horse owning mechanic that I've ever seen portrayed in a video game. The exploration aspects of this game are by far my absolute favorite. You can go anywhere and you can do anything. The possibilities are endless. So many different people play this game in drastically different ways. It's almost mind-blowing how many possibilities there really are to accomplish, all sorts of things within this game. My most favorite thing to do in this game is to explore, to just go out into the world and exist in it and search every place that you possibly can. Upon a second playthrough, I would assume that this game will take a lot less time because you will know where things are. But it could also take a lot more time if you decide to go and do everything, do all the side quests and, search every area of the map that you didn't see the first time you played it. This game is an incredible experience that will keep us thoroughly entertained for a long, long time.